role is really to train lay ministers and also volunteer clergy. And I work mainly with the Queen's Foundation in Birmingham, but mainly based at Shalford House in the diocese. I've been doing the job in more or less this form for about 7.5 years. So was fortunate enough to be given study leave earlier this year. And my research interest has long been in food and theology, food and the Bible, food and liturgy, food and the life of Jesus, food as mission. And I think that grew out of a sense that as a church, we've got a meal as our main central act of worship. But actually, it's a meal that we've made so, if you like, rarefied, so holy, that a lot of people don't even recognise that it's a meal anymore. The research that I've previously done has led me to feel very sure that Jesus' table fellowship was an absolute key to his ministry and therefore should be to ours. And in fact, that our model for the Eucharist shouldn't be limited to the Last Supper, but actually should take note of the whole of Jesus' table fellowship. And I would want to argue that from a biblical basis. St John's Gospel has Jesus' Eucharistic teaching immediately after the feeding of the multitude. Well, of course, that gives it a very different feel. I heard about a church in San Francisco, an Episcopal church, so a member of the Anglican Communion, just like us, and I had read and heard that they did some pretty unusual and exciting things with liturgy and with food. And so I went during my study leave to find out. And it really was a transformational experience. See, in Jesus' day, who you ate with actually defined who you were. So you didn't eat with people who were different race, obviously. Jews and Gentiles ate separately, but even the different sects within Judaism ate separately from each other. Women and men ate separately. Certainly women didn't eat with men who were outside their families. There were a huge number of rules, not only for Jews, but for the people in the Roman world as well. And Jesus just blew all those out of the water. He ate with absolutely everybody and anybody. And in his day, that was radical. And in the work that I've done, the thing that has saddened me actually is to rediscover, that's the exciting bit, rediscovering Jesus' table fellowship, who he ate with and how inclusive that was. But then actually to consider what we do as church. And often actually we're defined by the people we keep out rather than the people we include and welcome. And so I went to St Gregory's, where they actually model a completely inclusive church. At St Gregory's, everybody who comes is welcome to receive communion. No conditions, no anything else. All are welcome. And the fascinating thing to me is that one of the most powerful instruments of mission for that church is that open table. People come to Christ through receiving the elements, through being in community and receiving with others. So in mission terms, that's tremendously exciting. One of the other things that struck me was that I asked one of the founders of St Gregory's, a priest who actually trained in the UK, what their mission is. And he said, well, if you mean how do we attract new people to come to church, we don't actually need to do anything. They just come. They come, they love it, they're part of it, and they stay. And I just thought, wow, wouldn't that be amazing if we had churches here in our diocese who were saying that, whose worship was so attractive, so inclusive, so open to all. My experience of them as inclusive church was very, very moving, very personal and very real. I arrived at the church on Palm Sunday at 8:30 in the morning, knowing absolutely nobody and still a bit jet-lagged. And there was the most fantastic feast spread out, a brunch, of your dreams, if you love food, with hot chafing dishes and cold food all the way around the sanctuary. On the holy table, there were urns of coffee and juice. the feeding, the food, the shared meal was woven into the way in which the church worshipped and took place in the very sanctuary where the church worshipped. So for me, there was that fantastic joining of the holy in the ordinary, which actually is what I think the life of Jesus was about. And the wonderful thing was then moving on into worship and the feeling of the rightness of that, because I already knew people. We'd broken bread together over a meal. We'd got to know each other. And so therefore the worship flowed out of that shared eating. There were several other transformational moments for me, and one of them was on Easter Day at the Eucharist, and they have somebody who makes bread for them for communion. And on Easter morning, they made cinnamon bread. This wasn't announced, obviously, but as a good crusty chunk of delicious bread was passed to me, and I put it in my mouth, the flavour was absolutely gorgeous. And I suddenly found myself thinking, God tastes wonderful. And then I thought, well, how else would God taste? And of course, my next thought is, well, what are we doing by, regardless of what we think happens at the Eucharist, whether it's a memorial or whether there's sort of Christ present, what are we doing in making it so insipid, so tasteless, that we're somehow making God, we're reducing God, instead of actually offering people something delicious so that it's a wonderful memory or a wonderful experience of God, an encounter. And that has really changed. Since I came back from St Gregory's, I have been experimenting with all sorts of recipes, so I've had fun as well. And now I spend as much time preparing what we eat at communion as I do in preparing the liturgy. And that actually feels right to do that. And I think if you ask people who've shared in that, they have found that very exciting and very moving as well. At St Gregory's, the communion table is open. What that means is that anyone who comes is welcome to receive Christ, is welcome to come and eat and drink at God's table. More than that, they actually see it as an important part of mission. Quite a significant number of people there have become Christians through communion, through receiving at the table. That seems to me to be a huge challenge to us. We so often put barriers up. Almost as if we want to prevent people from coming or from being part of our club. And that's so different from how Jesus was, who welcomed all. People of all ages, children, adults, people who were unacceptable to others were welcomed. Even before the end of the service, the altar is cleared of the bread and wine, and they're replaced on the holy table with coffee urns and plates of the most fabulous cake you can imagine, absolutely delicious. The time of friendship after the service merges with the holy eating and drinking that happens within the service. And those boundaries are blurred, meeting Christ in each other, really allowing friendships to grow and to blossom. I first came to hear about St Gregory's through its food pantry because the lay leader at the church, Sarah Miles, whose brainchild it originally was, has written a number of books. It's most like what we would call a food bank, but different because there's absolutely no conditions. All are welcome to come and have as much as they need or is available on that day. When she's asked, what if these people don't really need food? Are they just ripping us off? Her response is, they have some kind of need, otherwise they wouldn't be here. And just as Jesus gave generously to all, so their theology of doing the food pantry is to give to all who come. This food is distributed from the sanctuary, and every week hundreds of people come. And the wonderful thing is, first of all, they consider that part of their worship. So that is written down in the service register because that doing worship, through serving others, is so fundamental to the mission and ministry of St Gregory's. They didn't look for money, but the reputation spread, and so donors, big donors, came to them and offered money. And there are now 25 food pantries across the area that started from that one. And the hungry are being fed in the name of Christ and from the most holy place in the church. And that to me is so exciting. Again, that is real mission. The food pantry is run almost entirely now by people who originally came seeking food. And the church, in the same way, is very much run by its members, and the leadership see their role genuinely as serving the members. And again, it's a model, that's something we talk about quite a lot, but I don't think I've ever seen it done quite like that before. And I think what I want to say to you more than anything else is that this actually does mission. This actually is church in a way that feels to me to be absolutely authentic in gospel terms, absolutely about being the body of Christ today, and was a tremendous challenge to me as to how we can do that in this diocese. The food pantry takes place in the sanctuary, and the sanctuary is a large round building, and all around the walls, high up, are 2 tiers of dancing saints, amazing icons, really colourful, in a stately dance around the walls. And the saints were chosen, the congregation were actually asked to vote on who they thought had lived a life that was in some way revealed God. And they chose the most extraordinary mix. So we've got people up there that we really wouldn't expect to see, like Elizabeth I, like the jazz trumpeter, John Coltrane. There's some of the more traditional saints, of course, there's St Francis. There's Lady Godiva from Coventry, because with her horse, indeed, because the story goes that her husband decreed huge taxes, and she begged him not to. She said there'll be people going naked in the streets with taxes like this. And he said to her, the first person I see riding naked through the streets of Coventry, I'll repeal the taxes. And so she went for it. She was a great woman. And the only saint up there without a halo is Desmond Tutu. And they've got the gold paint ready, although not hoping that it happens soon for when he dies. So you feel surrounded by saints of all kinds, from all the ages and from all cultures. And that as well is inspiring. That's part of the inclusion, to remind us that the church isn't just about us here and now. It's that great host, heavenly host through the ages of saints. By the time I was there for the 2nd or 3rd time, I was already being asked to do jobs to become a welcomer. And that felt really quite awkward. I said to the person who asked me, well, actually, I'm welcoming people here who come here every week. Isn't that a bit weird? So one of the first couples I welcomed, I made that apology, and they looked at me and said, well, you were here yesterday, weren't you? Well, of course you can welcome us. It's lovely to be welcomed by you. And there was just something about that immediately made me feel part of the community there. And in fact, regularly, they ask newcomers to take part, to ring a bell or to carry a flag or to do some small thing in the service. And it's amazing how that makes people feel as though they belong. Every single person there, old lag and visitor alike, wear name badges. And again, that's about, you can't tell who's new and who isn't. And it's just a way of breaking down barriers. The choir doesn't robe. They're a fabulous choir because they sing everything a cappella. They have no musical instruments at all. And so the choir is highly trained and the music is very beautiful, but they don't robe and they don't sit in a special place. They're woven throughout the congregation. So the whole of the singing actually is enhanced by that. Of course, the interesting thing is if you welcome people very quickly, they're not necessarily the people who are going to be committed and church members and voting on church decisions. So they have a different system. First of all, the inclusive table. Second, those who want to be baptised are then baptised, but baptism is separated from church membership. Church membership requires a particular commitment. Often the conflict in churches arises between the people who give their time to God and the church and the people who give their money. Each tends to feel that the other isn't quite pulling their weight. So they decided that when somebody wants to become a member at St Gregory's, they agree to commit a certain amount of time and a certain amount of money. Nobody tells them how much. That's entirely between them and God. But both time and money, however small, are asked, and that is about becoming a member. And so when you ask for volunteers for things, you will always get far more people than you need, because actually people are orientated towards the idea that they are contributing, that it's their community, they're part of it, and they're willing and wanting to give to it. And again, that in itself is exciting and attractive. Not long before I went, they'd had a serious think about their notice boards. And they thought, do you know, I'm not sure those are really very welcoming. What are we doing, they said, having a notice board that says, we're here at these times, you come and you take us on our terms. So they've replaced their notice board and they've replaced it with an outdoor blackboard with chalk. And the blackboard is divided into 3. And one column on the blackboard says, I remember. And the other one says, thank you for. And the third column is, please pray for. And passers-by write whatever they want on there. And all the time I was there, I never saw any graffiti or anything other than the desires, the memories, the gratitude of the people who were passing by that is then taken into the church and woven into the prayers of the people. Going to St Gregory's was a transformational experience for me, not least because it showed me how mission is integrated into everything they do and they are. Mission is integral to worship. It's integral to how they see other people, how they treat newcomers, how they are with visitors, how they break bread together, how they share food together, how the food pantry works. All of it is actually about bringing in God's kingdom, about doing God's will on earth as in heaven. And for that, I'm deeply grateful to them. And I would love to see something like this happening in Lichfield Diocese. Wouldn't that be exciting?